Okay, so when we last looked in on the Abbott and Costello filmography, it was on kind of a down note. I think everybody is pretty much hip to the fact that Coming Round the Mountain was not one of their stronger efforts. And there's a number of reasons for that, but one of the major things I pointed to is it just didn't feel like anybody wanted to be there. It just did not feel like anybody cared, like there was no passion for it. There wasn't anything interesting in it for anybody, and it just felt like the entire cast and crew were just checking the boxes, waiting until the end of the day so they could collect their paycheck and go home. And when that's kind of the general feeling, you can see that. That translates onto the screen or the stage or anywhere. You can tell when someone's just kind of phoning it in or when they are absolutely done. And I feel like if this one had had kind of the spark of innovation or something that got the cast excited to be a part of it, maybe it might have saved it. Well, Coming Around the Mountain, unfortunately, was unable to be saved, but luckily, that spark happens with this film. You can say a lot about this movie, but the one thing you can say for sure is that there is definitely an energy. Bud and Lou are there for this one. They are invested, and I mean that in every sense of the way, not only in terms of their performances, but they're invested in terms of their money. So Jack and the Beanstalk is another one of those films that Bud and Lou produced themselves, kind of like with Africa Screams, as part of their new contract with Universal, allowing them to kind of go off and make their own movies every so often. So what they kind of did with this one and their next film, which we'll talk about, 2 movies from now, Abbott and Costello Meet Captain Kidd, is they kind of took turns in the producer chair. For this film, Lou's production company put up the money, and technically Lou was in charge and Bud was working for him. And then with Abbott and Costello Meet Captain Kidd, in that one, Bud's production company put up the money, and Lou was working for him. So this is a film, in both cases, that Bud and Lou had control over. This was not a studio mandate or something that was just kind of cranked out. This is something they had say over and control over for both good and ill. I can say, and some folks pointed out that some of the issues the film had might have been directed at the fact that Lou was in charge and didn't want to change things. But I also feel that that passion for what you're doing and that joy of being able to make your own decisions kind of makes up for the various shortcomings of this film, because it really is rather infectious and joyous to watch. And you can feel that. A lot is made of, and I don't really compare this movie to like the films of Ed Wood, but let's just use that as an example. People wonder, why do we enjoy the films of Ed Wood? Why is there this charm to them, despite the fact they're obviously terrible movies? Because there is a passion there. And watching those films, you really do get the sense that this was a guy that was just really excited to be making a movie and was doing everything he could to just make a movie and not really care if it was the best movie in the world. He just wanted to make a movie. And that's the feeling I get watching this film, that Bud and Lou really just wanted to make their movie and make it their way, and they did. And that really goes a long way. That energy, that rejuvenated sense of purpose, it really comes through in this film. I think also because they were in charge, they were able to do some things that they hadn't done yet, or take some chances they had not initially taken. Before I get into that, let's talk quickly about the plot. It's Jack and the Beanstalk. The only thing that really needs explaining is, the framing device where Lou is a babysitter who's charged with babysitting this really bratty kid, and over the course of it, the kid reads Lou the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Lou has a dream and dreams himself into the main part and populates the rest of it with people he's encountered, including Bud, including the sister and her boyfriend of the bratty kid he's babysitting, a cop he ran into, standard movie dream stuff. And then the rest of it is just Jack and the Beanstalk. So I don't feel I need to go into the plot, really. So anyway, going back to my original point about them being able to do things that they weren't necessarily able to do prior. And I think one of those things is seen in the genre of film that this is. This is very clearly a kid's picture. Now, that to me makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense in every aspect of the word. First of all, you're doing a much more low budget picture. So the thinking then is a little bit like the thinking now, is that if it's made for kids, you can cheap out a little bit, or not even so much that, but you can get away with the kind of store-bought costumes. You can get away with the almost dress-up kind of feel and the cardboardness of the sets a bit, because it does kind of resemble a pop-up book. And that's all in service of it being a kid's story. Also, there's a thing we got to understand, and that is that the work of Abbott and Costello, especially at its time, was beloved by children. Kids loved Abbott and Costello. And during this time, I kind of meant to bring this up when we were talking about Coming Around the Mountain, is that a lot of their previous films, a lot of their early work, were being re-released to the theaters. So kids were now starting to witness Abbott and Costello routines that they maybe didn't get to see. Either they were too young or they weren't born yet. Plus, Abbott and Costello were starting to appear on TV. So kids were starting to really latch onto them. There are certain performers that kids just really, really take to. And I can't speak for it because I wasn't there, obviously. But it just seems to me that kids really took to Curly from the Three Stooges, and I think that's why the Three Stooges are so popular amongst children. Harpo Marx, but not the other Marx brothers. It never seemed like Groucho or Chico were as well known to their youth audience, but Harpo always was. Stan Laurel and Lou Costello, probably because the Lou Costello, the Harpo, the Curly character, the Stan Laurel character, they were children, and they were characters that kids could relate to on their own level, and they never talked down to kids. I mentioned it when we were talking about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, that in some ways that film worked too well because kids were actually afraid of it, because Lou Costello was a little kid and they could relate to that. So kids loved Abbott and Costello, and it made sense to do a matinee film for them to be seen with the cartoons and the movie serials. And I think one of the other things that needs to be acknowledged here, and we've talked about it on this show, but I really think it needs to be spoken of out loud, is that kids loved Abbott and Costello, and Abbott and Costello loved kids. Bud and Lou, you can say whatever you want about them, and I know people can say a lot, but there's one thing that is undeniable. The evidence is all there, and that is that Bud Abbott and Lou Costello loved children. You can see it in the reminiscence of their own children, who still speak very fondly of both of them. You can see it in any of the movies or shows where they have to work with children, that they are clearly having the time of their lives and are very, very endearing to those children. And you can see it in all of the work that they did outside of their regular act. All the charities they did, the Lou Costello Jr. Foundation, and all the things they did for kids. So they loved children. And it makes perfect sense to take that and say, well, let's make a movie specifically for them. And I think that is another thing that really comes out in this picture, is that there is a lot of love. This is something for the children. And I think when you make something with that kind of passion and with that noble of an ambition, you can't help but create something endearing, which I feel they did. So what's also interesting about this one is, once again, since they have control over it, it's interesting what they kept and what they didn't. So we don't have any traditional Abbott and Costello routines in this one. This is, it's routineless. I can't think of anything they've done in here that they've done in previous films or on stage or anything like that. It's all original. It's all situation-based. One of the things I find very interesting is slight changes to the Lou Costello on-screen persona. Now, as we have illustrated in this series, because we've looked at all their movies, one of the guaranteed ways to make money back then was show Lou Costello being scared. Lou being scared is guaranteed funny. That is one of the defining traits of the Lou Costello on-screen persona, is that he is kind of a scaredy cat. He'll rise to the occasion, but he's usually, I don't want to say a coward, but he's a scaredy cat. In this film, he is the hero. He's still scared of the giant, but he gets into sword fights, he gets into battles, he plots against the giant. You know, he is not doing his kind of scared of my shadow runaway caricature that he had done in his previous films. Now, you can excuse that by using the catch-all excuse of it's just a dream, and this is his idealized self. But also, I think it's neat to kind of see that take on the Lou Costello character. It's interesting also that they chose to keep the musical numbers. Of all things to keep were the musical numbers, which by all accounts Bud and Lou hated in most of their previous films. And yet this is a musical. I can only assume that they were inspired by the success of Wizard of Oz, which was a musical. So they were basically trying to create their own version of the Wizard of Oz, which would make sense. That would explain a lot. Good or ill. So it's interesting that they have the songs back in it. The songs are kind of 50-50. There are some decent ones in there. The title Jack and the Beanstalk is okay. The end song is it's not great, but it serves its purpose. No, the star of this one is Lou's solo number I Fear Nothing When I Am in the Right, which was kind of my anthem in middle school. I really took that song as I was, believe it or not, I know you wouldn't think of it to look at me now, a man who drives around talking about, old Abbott and Costello films with a bunch of stuffed animals, but believe it or not, I was bullied a lot in school. I know. You're saying to yourself the figure skater who was a Star Trek fan was bullied in school? No, surely you jest. I do not, friends. I was a target for bullies, and the I Fear Nothing song was kind of I say this a lot, this is kind of the This Is Me for me personally. I won't say for my generation, because half my generation didn't know who Lou Costello was. I mean, they did after they got done with being in high school with me and my best friend. We told them, but I digress. But it's a charming little song about courage and standing up for yourself and, plucking your chest out. So I have a real soft spot in my heart for that song. It's not perfect, it's not great, but it's good enough. It's a fun little number. The songs sung by our romantic lead, James Alexander, who plays the dual role of the prince as well as the boyfriend of the sister in the real world. His songs, however, are atrocious. They are just terrible. They are just repulsive. Oh God, I can't even. They were so bad. It's also interesting that they chose to keep the boy-girl love story that they, again, reportedly hated in all of their earlier films, and yet they had a prince and princess love story, as opposed to Lou getting the girl, which you would think you would do in one of these movies, where Jack would get the girl. He'd marry the princess. No, they have a prince-princess love story in this one. I'm not going to get into that. It's kind of ridiculous. It's funny ridiculous. But it's one of those things you're just like, I wonder why they decided to go in that direction. But regardless, another Abbott and Costello alumni appears in this one, making her second film in a row with Bud and Lou. So Shay Kogan plays the Princess Eloise, as well as the sister of the bratty kid in the real world. We last saw her in our last picture. She also played Matt, the hillbilly child bride to Lou Costello, in that really weird love story that they were doing there. She seems much more at home in this role. This seems like more her speed. She just feels more like a princess at a kid's birthday party than she does a hillbilly. And that's not a knock. She's very lovely. She puts on that air of a princess. She wears the costume well. You know, it's just clear that this is kind of where her comfort zone is at. She's much more charming in this film. I do have to say they give the boy-girl love story a little bit more time and a little bit more drive of the plot than it was in their previous movies, where it just felt like there were two different films going on at the same time. So that's a plus. Other Abbott and Costello alumni appearing in this film. So playing the giant is Buddy Bear, who we last saw in Africa Screams, where he and his brother were the henchmen. He does a great job as the giant. He's already a big guy, and they've got him in lifts. Those boots are massive, like comically massive. But there are times he actually looks really scary. So I give them credit. They actually made the giant pretty intimidating. Also appearing in this one is Dorothy Ford, who is a very tall woman, who was originally one of the Amazons, the basketball players, in Here Come the Co-Eds. And she stars in there as the giant's housekeeper, who was also Lou's semi-love interest. One of the highlights of the film is them doing a comical dance together, very reminiscent of the dance that Lou did in Hold That Go. As a matter of fact, they even keep one of the bits where she's got her hands behind her head and she's doing this bit and smacking him in the head each time. But the real comedy of it, of course, she's a very tall woman. I'd say she's at least 6 foot, and in heels, dancing with little Lou Costello. So that's kind of where the comedy lies in that. Also, we have to say that this film marks the screen debut for a Hollywood icon. Yes, this is the first film to feature Bud Abbott's mustache. Abbott and Costello fans know there's 2 versions of Bud. Skinny Bud, mustached Bud. And this is the first film. He grew the mustache for this role and then just kept it. Which I think was a good choice. I think it was a good choice as he was getting older. It gave him kind of a debonair look, which is why he decided to keep it, by according to his daughter. So the film has a lot of charm. It's not to say that it's perfect. I think where it's hurt is that it is a self-produced, it's an independent movie, for lack of better terminology. That's what it is, an indie film. And it shows. It's, as I said, the sets and the costumes are all very community theater. Not knocking community theater, just saying that doesn't always play in a movie. The choreography, the songs are all clearly not done by, one of the higher-ups. Especially the choreography. The dance choreography is very, very simple, and you're like, oh, is that all we're gonna do? Okay, whatever. So that's a thing. And I hesitate to pick on this because there's a lot of reasons this could be. So one of the things Bud and Lou wanted to do with their films, the ones they produced, is they wanted them to be shot in color. Universal was not willing to spend that money at the time, but Bud and Lou wanted to do some color films. So this is the first of their films that's in color. And the color process that they're using is, of course, one of the cheaper versions. And unfortunately, couple that with the fact that they're probably using cheaper film stock, the film does not have a very good transfer. It looks cheap. I hate to say it. It looks like someone's home movies. And you know, again, that could also be because I'm watching it on, I don't want to say a bootleg copy, but this is much like Africa Screams. Matter of fact, they were paired together because this was produced through Lou's production company, which is no longer around. That means nobody really owns the rights to it, at least not at the time of when I was watching Abbott and Costello films. So this one and Africa Screams were often sold on a double disc, and you could get them like for $1 some places. So it's very possible I'm not just looking at a very good transfer of it. I understand there is a Blu-ray copy of it out there somewhere, so that may actually improve the picture a little bit. But even like the sections in the real world, which are traditionally black and white, are brown. You know, so it's just not a very good looking film, which again, I think there are circumstances outside of the film's control that attribute to that, but it doesn't help it. But that is a minor quibble. Yes, it's a cheaper film. Yes, it's a kiddie picture, so it's not as complex as some of their other work. But as I've said, there is an infectious joy about this one that I really loved when I was a kid. Maybe not a little kid, but I was a youngster when I first saw it, and it really grabbed me. And I had those feelings again watching it. When you have the passion and the drive, that comes across on camera just as much as the exhaustion and the fatigue. So I think this is a charming one. Baby's first Abbott and Costello, and for a reason. So there you have it. There's this one. So when we return, this one is going to be very dear to my heart, simply because, as I've mentioned many a time, I am originally from the 49th state, Alaska. That is my home. That's my home territory, my home turf, and I'm very proud to be from Alaska, Sarah Palin notwithstanding. And I'm very happy to say that when we return for Abbott and Costello Meet Drive Home Reviews, we will be joining Abbott and Costello as they get lost in Alaska. So thank you very much for joining me. We'll see you back here next time. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.